more you chase, the more you get ignored. The more available you are, the less they value you. You feel it already, don't you? You reply in seconds. You adjust your schedule. You over-explain your intentions. You try to be understood. You try to prove you are loyal, different, sincere. And somehow the result is the opposite of what you expected. The texts get shorter. The tone gets colder. The respect subtly drops. And you sit there wondering what changed, replaying conversations in your head, asking yourself if you said too much, if you cared too much, if you showed too much. You think closeness builds attraction, but actually, overexposure kills it. You think constant reassurance builds security, but actually, it builds complacency. And most people never realize this because they were trained to believe that more effort equals more love, more visibility equals more influence, more availability equals more importance. That belief is quietly sabotaging you. You are not struggling because you are not good enough. You are struggling because you are too accessible. You are not losing respect because you lack value. You are losing respect because you display all your value up front with no filter, no pacing, no restraint. And when something is always available, the human mind stops perceiving it as rare. You are dealing with a psychological law, whether you like it or not. Scarcity creates desire, certainty creates comfort, and too much comfort erases tension. Attraction does not grow in comfort. Respect does not grow in overfamiliarity. It grows in controlled distance. Right now, you might be the person who always initiates, always checks in, always explains, always forgives first. You might think this makes you mature. You might think this makes you emotionally intelligent. But look carefully at the dynamic you're creating. When you remove the need for the other person to earn your presence, you remove the incentive for them to invest. When you give loyalty before it is tested, you make it cheap. When you stay available even after being slightly disrespected, you silently teach people how to treat you. And here is the uncomfortable truth. People do not respect what they do not have to work for. That includes your time. That includes your attention. That includes your emotional energy. You don't lose attraction because you created distance. You lose attraction because you erased mystery. You told them everything. You responded to everything. You filled every silence. You removed every question mark. And the human brain is addicted to question marks. It is addicted to anticipation. When someone is slightly out of reach, the mind leans forward. When someone is fully predictable, the mind relaxes. And when the mind relaxes too much, interest fades. This is not about playing manipulative games. This is about understanding human nature at a level most people are too afraid to confront. You were taught that being real means being fully transparent at all times. But strategic restraint is not fake. It is intelligent. There is a difference between authenticity and overexposure. Authenticity is knowing who you are. Overexposure is giving unrestricted access to who you are before someone has earned it. And if you are honest with yourself, you have felt the shift happen. In the beginning, they were curious. They asked questions. They leaned in. But the moment you started over-giving, over-texting, over-explaining, the energy shifted. Subtle, almost invisible, but real. You became predictable. You became guaranteed. And guaranteed attention feels safe, but it does not feel exciting. You think your constant presence proves your worth, but actually it signals dependency. You think answering immediately shows interest, but sometimes it signals that you have nothing else commanding your focus. And whether people consciously think this or not, they feel it. Humans are extremely sensitive to perceived hierarchy. When one person seems more invested than the other, the balance tilts, and respect follows balance. The more you try to secure someone through closeness, the more you unintentionally position yourself beneath them. This is why distance builds attraction and respect. Distance restores balance. Distance reintroduces effort. Distance creates a subtle uncertainty that triggers investment. When your presence is not automatic, it becomes something to earn. When your time is not instantly available, it becomes something to appreciate. When your emotional energy is not overflowing onto them, it becomes something to qualify for. You don't need to disappear dramatically. You don't need to act cold or cruel. The solution is far more controlled and far more powerful. You regulate access. You stop reacting instantly. You let silence breathe. You allow messages to sit. You allow them to wonder. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. "I'm busy" is enough. You stop justifying why you couldn't respond immediately. You stop apologizing for having priorities. You build a life that naturally limits your availability instead of artificially pretending to be distant. Because real distance is not about strategy alone, it is about substance. When you have goals, routines, standards, and a vision that commands your focus, you don't cling. And when you don't cling, your energy shifts. People feel that shift. They feel when you are centered in your own life instead of orbiting around theirs. And that shift alone changes how they treat you. The core problem you are facing is not that you care too much. It's that you give too much without calibration. You give before there is investment. You commit before there is consistency. You prioritize before there is proof. And then you feel confused when the effort is not reciprocated. But reciprocity requires space. If you fill every gap, there is no room for the other person to step forward. If you always initiate, they never have to. If you always reassure, they never have to reflect. Distance creates that gap. That gap is uncomfortable at first. You will feel the urge to reach out, to clarify, to secure. But if you hold that space, something interesting happens. Either they step in and invest, or they don't. And if they don't, you learn the truth faster. Distance doesn't just build attraction. It reveals reality. It exposes who values your absence and who only tolerated your presence. And that knowledge is power. You must understand, respect is not given to those who overextend. It is given to those who control themselves. Emotional discipline is more attractive than emotional intensity. Calm restraint is more powerful than loud devotion. When you can care deeply but still maintain structure, you radiate authority, and authority is magnetic. So if you are tired of feeling overlooked, underappreciated, slightly taken for granted, the answer is not to give more. It is to give less, but with intention. It is to speak less, but with weight. It is to show up less frequently, but more deliberately. It is to stop proving and start positioning, because the more you chase, the more you get ignored. The more you make yourself scarce with purpose, the more you become valued. And most people will never dare to apply this because they are addicted to reassurance. But if you can tolerate the silence, if you can withstand the temporary discomfort of pulling back, you will witness something powerful. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, it becomes desired. Let me say this clearly before we go deeper. You were conditioned to believe that more effort fixes everything. But in dynamics of attraction and respect, unmanaged effort destroys leverage. Most people operate from a scarcity mindset while trying to create abundance. They overgive attention to feel secure. They overexplain to avoid misunderstanding. They overcompensate to avoid rejection. And every time they do this, they unconsciously lower their perceived value. This is the reality slap. Effort does not automatically equal importance. Visibility does not automatically equal authority. Accessibility does not automatically equal intimacy. In fact, the opposite is often true. The person who is always present becomes background noise. The person who is always agreeing becomes predictable. The person who is always available becomes optional. You might resist this because it sounds cold, but observe social hierarchies closely. The individual who speaks the least often carries the most weight. The one who is hardest to schedule is often perceived as the most important. The one who doesn't react emotionally immediately appears the most grounded. This is not coincidence. It is perception economics. Value rises when supply is controlled. Now let's go one layer deeper into psychology. The human brain is wired to chase what feels uncertain. Dopamine spikes not when we receive something, but when we anticipate it. Anticipation is the drug. When someone is slightly unpredictable, slightly out of reach, slightly independent, the brain starts filling gaps. It imagines, it projects, it invests. But when everything is laid out, when responses are instant, when emotions are fully revealed too soon, the mystery collapses. And without mystery, there is no pursuit. Without pursuit, there is no tension. Without tension, attraction flattens. This applies in dating, in friendships, in leadership, even in professional environments. When your emotional reactions are immediate and transparent, people feel they understand you completely. And once someone feels they have fully mapped you, curiosity declines. Curiosity is oxygen for attraction. Remove oxygen and the fire dims slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. You don't notice it at first. The replies are still there. The conversations still happen. But the energy shifts. The urgency disappears. That is the cost of overexposure. Now picture a real scenario. Imagine you meet someone new. In the beginning, you have your own schedule, your own goals, your own rhythm. You respond when you can. You are warm but not consuming. They lean in. They initiate. They ask questions. Now slowly, you start prioritizing them over your routines. You reply faster. You cancel plans. You share deeper vulnerabilities early. You make them your emotional center. What happens? Subtly, their effort decreases. Not because they decided to disrespect you, but because the dynamic changed. You remove the need for them to earn access. You made yourself certain. Certainty feels safe, but safety without challenge reduces perceived value. This is the uncomfortable loop most people never identify. They think the solution is to give more affection, more communication, more reassurance, but that accelerates the imbalance. Instead of increasing attraction, it increases asymmetry, and asymmetry erodes respect. So what is the first rule? Control access, not by playing games, but by structuring your time. You do not respond instantly to everything. You do not make yourself emotionally available 24/7. You let calls go unanswered sometimes. You allow messages to wait. You protect your schedule without apologizing excessively. When you do this consistently, people recalibrate. They recognize your time has weight, and weight creates gravity. The second rule, eliminate over-validation. The moment you start seeking constant reassurance, you signal insecurity. When you repeatedly ask where you stand, you communicate that your internal stability depends on their answer. Stability is attractive. Dependency is heavy. When you stop asking for confirmation and start assuming your worth, the energy shifts. You begin interacting from choice rather than fear, and people feel that difference immediately. They feel when you are choosing them instead of needing them. The third rule, build substance behind your distance. Distance without depth is manipulation. Distance with purpose is authority. If you pull back but sit in emptiness waiting for a reaction, you are still attached. But if you pull back because your life is genuinely full, because your goals demand focus, because your standards filter access, then your absence becomes real. And real absence triggers real reflection. When someone cannot fully predict your schedule, cannot fully access your emotional bandwidth, cannot fully assume your loyalty without effort, they begin to value interactions more. Each conversation feels intentional. Each meeting feels selected. Scarcity sharpens appreciation. Now let's reinforce this from another angle. Respect is built on perceived self-control. The person who can regulate their impulses appears powerful. If you instantly react to every emotional fluctuation, you look reactive. If you can sit in silence without rushing to fix tension, you look grounded. That grounded presence commands a different level of treatment. It signals internal authority. And authority, even in subtle forms, generates attraction. Most people sabotage this by fearing silence. Silence feels like loss of control, but silence is control. When you don't rush to fill space, the other person feels it. They lean in, they wonder, they adjust. The dynamic begins to rebalance. Let's loop back to the core concept again from another perspective. When you are overly available, you unconsciously communicate that your time has low demand. High-demand individuals cannot be accessed instantly. They have commitments, they have boundaries, they have standards. Even if you are not globally important, you must operate as if your life matters deeply to you. Because if it doesn't matter to you, it will not matter to others. Attraction and respect are reflections of how you allocate yourself. If you allocate yourself cheaply, you are treated cheaply. If you allocate yourself selectively, you are treated selectively. This is not cruelty, it is calibration. Now understand this tension. Distance must be balanced with warmth. If you become cold without depth, you repel. But if you combine warmth with restraint, you create polarity. You show care, but you don't overextend. You engage, but you don't chase. You invest, but you require reciprocity. That combination creates intrigue, and intrigue sustains attention far longer than intensity ever could. Intensity burns fast. Intrigue burns slow. Slow burns last. So every time you feel the urge to over-message, to over-clarify, to over-give, pause. Ask yourself, am I adding value or am I reducing tension? Am I expressing authenticity or am I dissolving mystery? Am I strengthening balance or am I tilting the scale? These micro decisions shape perception, and perception shapes behavior. When you change how you show up, others adjust unconsciously. They initiate more. They invest more. They respect more, not because you demanded it, but because the structure changed. Distance, when done correctly, is not withdrawal. It is strategic pacing. It is understanding that constant exposure numbs appreciation. It is recognizing that desire grows in space. It is mastering the discipline of not giving everything at once. And the deeper truth is this: when you stop centering your world around someone else, you become the center of your own. That internal shift radiates outward. People respond to it. They feel the difference between someone who is self-contained and someone who is seeking containment. Self-contained energy attracts. Seeking energy chases. And the more you chase, the more you erode leverage. So, you break the cycle. You regulate access. You remove over-validation. You build a life that naturally limits availability. You tolerate silence. You maintain mystery. You repeat this consistently, and slowly the dynamic transforms. Because attraction and respect are not begged for. They are triggered. And they are triggered by controlled distance, disciplined presence, and calibrated investment. Everything comes down to perceived value, and perceived value comes down to control. Not control over other people, but control over yourself. Control over your impulses to chase, to explain, to prove, to secure. If you strip away all the psychology, all the scenarios, all the strategies, the core truth is simple and brutal. The person who needs less holds more power. And power, whether people admit it or not, is attractive. Respect does not attach itself to desperation. It attaches itself to discipline. You want attraction? You must master restraint. You want respect? You must stop overextending. This is the rule most people will never accept, because it requires emotional maturity. It requires you to sit with uncertainty without reacting. It requires you to let someone feel your absence without panicking. It requires you to trust that your value does not decrease just because you are not constantly visible. Most people cannot tolerate that silence. They interpret silence as loss. They interpret distance as danger. So they rush back in. They text again. They clarify again. They overgive again. And every time they do, they weaken their position. But you are not most people. You understand now that tension is not your enemy. Tension is a test of your stability. When you can hold tension without collapsing into overreaction, you signal strength. Strength builds respect. Respect sustains attraction. If you want to be valued, you must be willing to walk away from dynamics that undervalue you. Not dramatically, not emotionally, calmly, decisively. The willingness to lose is what prevents you from being controlled. The moment someone senses that you are afraid to lose them, the balance shifts. The moment they sense that your life continues smoothly, with or without them, the respect recalibrates. This is not about ego. It is about standards. Standards are invisible until they are enforced. If you tolerate inconsistency, you teach inconsistency. If you tolerate delayed respect, you normalize delayed respect. If you tolerate emotional crumbs, you shrink your own expectations. But when you pull back the moment effort drops, when you reduce access the moment boundaries are tested, you communicate something powerful without speaking. My presence is conditional on mutual value. That sentence alone changes how people treat you. Everything you have learned here collapses into one principle. You must become the prize in your own life. Not in arrogance, not in superiority, in self-containment. When you wake up focused on your mission instead of someone's validation, your energy shifts. When your schedule reflects priorities beyond a single person, your presence becomes selective. When your emotional state is regulated internally instead of externally, your reactions slow down. And slow reactions feel powerful. Fast reactions feel needy. If you want attraction, you must be slightly unpredictable, not chaotic, not inconsistent, just not fully mapped. Let people discover you in layers. Let them earn deeper access. Let them experience phases of you instead of the entire blueprint immediately. Mystery is not deception, it is pacing. And pacing creates longevity. Most connections fail because they burn too hot, too fast. Oversharing, overcommitting, overpromising, then slowly cooling into indifference. Distance prevents that collapse. Distance stretches the experience. Distance keeps curiosity alive. Now understand this final truth. You cannot fake indifference. If you try to act distant while internally obsessing, your energy will betray you. Real distance begins inside. It begins when your identity is not attached to being chosen, when you know you are valuable, regardless of who stays or leaves. That internal detachment is calm, quiet, immovable. It does not threaten. It does not beg. It simply exists. And existence without need is magnetic. If you want respect, you must accept that not everyone will stay. If you want attraction, you must accept that not everyone will understand you. Most people will misinterpret your restraint as disinterest. Let them. The ones who value depth will lean closer. The ones who seek control will drift away. That filtering effect is a benefit, not a loss. Stop trying to be universally accessible. Stop trying to be constantly understood. The more you explain yourself to people who do not invest, the cheaper your energy becomes. Instead, let your actions speak in patterns. Consistency without overexposure. Warmth without overextension. Availability without immediacy. This balance is rare, and rarity commands attention. In the end, attraction is not built by how much you give. It is built by how much you make others qualify to receive. Respect is not built by how loudly you demand it. It is built by how calmly you withdraw when it is absent. So here is the final rule. If you want to be desired, you must be willing to be unavailable. If you want to be respected, you must be willing to be alone. That sentence separates those who chase from those who lead. Most people will never apply this because they are addicted to constant connection. They fear being forgotten. They fear being replaced. They fear being misunderstood. But what they don't realize is this: overexposure is what makes them replaceable. When you are everywhere, you are ordinary. When you are selective, you are memorable. When your presence is earned, it is protected. When your absence is felt, it is respected. So from this moment forward, move differently. Speak with intention. Reply with space. Invest with standards. Let people feel the slight tension of not fully having you. Let them wonder just a little. Let them work just enough. And watch what happens. Watch how conversations change. Watch how effort increases. Watch how tone shifts. Because when your presence is no longer guaranteed, it becomes valuable. When your attention is no longer automatic, it becomes powerful. And when you finally understand that you are not here to chase, but to choose, everything changes. Read this again if you have to, not to memorize it, but to internalize it. Then apply it quietly. No announcements, no dramatic exits, just controlled distance, disciplined energy, and unwavering self-respect. That is power.